Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2. See the card in the description for part 1. The Frost Darts adventure continues. Let's dive in. I start by 4-linking Ice Nova, my main freeze spell. I still have to ascend, so I finish the trial, kill the boss, get some loot from the chests, pick Stormweaver because I have no clue what a Chronomancer does, and after some deliberation and looking at the various skills, I decide on Permanent Arcane Search. There are some additional passive nodes on the tree to increase the effect as well. I think it can be a good quality of life feature. I get decent boots from the trial, I need those resistances, I kill Root Dredge and upgrade Ice Nova to level 9, I put Elemental Focus into Frost Dart, get another Lesser Jeweler Orb and I 4-link Frost Bomb. I get a Pearl Ring for cast speed, I channel my inner Zizran on the mighty Silver Fist twice.
No, I'm done. I'm hard stuck in the campaign.
But 1 minute later he does go down, providing passive points, and I take Frost Archon. Abyss continues to be deadly, I get Compression Duration 2 on Frost Bomb, trying to detonate it ASAP. I take the Mana Regen reward, I get rid of the Bog Witch, and that means more spirits. Not much later I decided to spec out of Frost Archon again, because I don't feel it did much for me in the campaign and I take this Gold Cluster instead. I think the main culprit with the Frost Archon for now is that it has a huge cooldown, so it's only up for a very small amount of the time. I reactivate Arctic Armor for now, I fight and defeat the Chimera who drops another Lesser Jeweler's Orb, which I allocate to Cold Snap. I decide to put cooldown recovery as a support so I can cast it more often. Here is a bit of mapping gameplay, for me this is good enough. Ice Nova, Cold Snap, it does well. What doesn't go well is Viper Nazi, where I keep dying over and over again. My defenses aren't great, I have no chaos resistance, which I guess doesn't help with her poisons. I get stunned a lot, making dodging mechanics a lot harder, and on top of that, single target damage is still bad. After a few tries, however, I manage. It's time for the Act boss, and I'm just showing this to give an indication of the fight, the damage, and talk a bit about the build. For the most part, Act 3 I feel was quite smooth. The Permanent Arcane Search, including the passive 3 nodes, feels great. It's amazing quality of life. Remnant generation is still quite poor, I will solve that later in the video. Defenses aren't all there either. I am not 100% sure what you should aim for in terms of defenses yet, and when resistances become truly problematic, but with time I will figure that out. All in all, I feel I am managing just okay for now. Doryani goes down, I think this is again an amazing fight, and it is time to explore the new content. This chapter is mostly me talking about my feels about the new campaign, but there are timestamps. The next chapter focuses mostly on the build again, and this one is mostly sightseeing. So, I am now back in King's March, the town I have built myself about 15 times, but before we go island hopping, I should get my second ascendancy. Unfortunately, I get Balak, who completely destroys me. This boss is something else. But okay, I go again, encounter a balanced boss this time. Still challenging, don't get me wrong, but at least you have an option to dodge his abilities, and I take Force of Will. I will just stick to the Arcane Search synergy for now. On the Isle of Kin, filled with little creatures on the backs of massive units, I find a torn map. The island is further inhabited by a bunch of bosses, most of which pose a significant challenge to my character as I don't do much damage. And then there's the final island boss, Krutok, infused with sulfite, surrounded by lava. Somehow this guy reminds me of Gruul from World of Warcraft Burning Crusade. He is easier than Gruul, however, and the little detail I appreciate about this fight is the captured guy in the cage who gives me audio cues when Krutok is about to puke all over the arena. It's the little things like this which make me appreciate Act 4 quite a lot. I do a little respec and I get rid of all the starter passive nodes in favor of attributes, plus simply better damage nodes in other parts of the tree. I am typically trying to take nodes that provide damage, especially those along the path. This way I don't spend too many points on traveling, although I'm sure people more knowledgeable about this game would disagree. For now, I just want sensible nodes to make it through the campaign, and I feel with a tree like this, which is sensible but not optimized, I shouldn't have any issues. Which isn't to say I don't have any issues, but we'll get to that. I dropped a decent chest armor, decide to desecrate it, add 2 sockets, 2 slams, but the well doesn't give me all that much. Danik doesn't want to sell me anything, that's how good my build is, so I will be on my way to the abandoned prison where Kanu provides the intro. It's another detail I can really appreciate. And if you walk away, he responds to that as well. The abandoned prison is another piece of magnificent world building. Some people may think it's annoying that you can't move because of the crashing waves into this place, which leave behind a flooded prison, but I can appreciate this zone a lot. If this were a map, it would be too much, and maybe it is a map that I haven't encountered yet, but for a campaign zone I think it's top notch. The prisoner himself, a very cool fight. Having to interact with the ballista to stop him from healing, I think it's a lot of fun. Up next is Catch Bay, with tons of stranded Galguran ships. Protector of the shores is Captain Hartlin, who obliterates me at first with ghost cannons, but the next attempt works a lot better. When he summons his old crewmates, that's a window of opportunity for me to freeze them, create remnants, and push out a lot of damage. Next island, Wakapanu. It's very lush and green. I freeze and snap my way through the jungle and caves and abyss monsters, engrave short fuse for Frostbomb, and then it is time for the island mistress, the Amora. It's a lovely creature, true to her name, at first at least. An excellent fight with multiple phases, avoiding the song indicated by the beam of light, and cute jellyfish I quite enjoy, and she, just like most other bosses, has a bunch of different abilities. It's not necessarily hard, but you have to pay attention, and fighting these bosses without being overpowered is incredible, I think. Then Strike Island, where the Karui hold their trials. It's small and not very interesting, although the art style is again astonishing. The boss is a copy of the bird in the trials, which I guess makes sense, and this bird is also there in the Lost Towers map, which I don't think makes sense, but there you go. I know this fight, no issues there. I then undertake a little trial of my own in Hinakora's Eye. It leads to the trial of the ancestors, but that is not available in the game yet. I guess next patch we can do it and ascend. You can get some blessings, however, and I take the cold resistance plus strength and dexterity. The area ends with another amazing fight against the Yama, the monkey. It's just really fucking good, this one. I think if he's chilled, you actually have more time in the phase where you need to run to the correct clone, or they nerfed it, but I feel I have a lot more time than I had last week. I managed to take him down, I am worthy in that sense. I get 2 passives and that is it for now. Back in town, I decide to anoint my amulet and I make my way to Arastas, where I am betrayed, and there are 2 fights worth mentioning. First, this guy, Thorfian. If you do a lot of damage, you won't see half of this fight, but if your build is as ethical as mine, you may realize he is getting a bunch of buffs throughout the fight up to the point where you basically do no damage to him anymore. One of the guys on the left summons a bunch of walls, and it looks like he gets another buff if I break those walls. Sometimes the walls spawn on me, so I instantly break them, but at some point I do figure all of this out and manage to have less and less buffs on him. I am out of flasks though, and the last part of this fight therefore is incredibly tense, as I am desperately trying to avoid his throw attack and the other attacks, the massive pillar of flame and his regular stuff, but I do make it out. Shortly after, I encounter First Herald Benedictus. This is the first time I see all of his abilities, and again, the GGG boss design guys have outdone themselves, really. He does several Cirrus-like maze abilities, just fantastic stuff, although it isn't immediately clear if I have to run away or towards him. In this case, clearly not towards him, but I survived the slam with a sliver of health. The second time it is towards him and the skill seems to bug out a bit. I'm not sure it's supposed to be like this, but either way he goes down in one try. I reach the final island, Ngakanu, get greeted warmly by its inhabitants, I return the favor and I make my way to the end. I engrave harmonic remnants in the hope of better sustain of remnants. Here's a bit of essence and abyss action so you can see the clear, and it is not bad at all. And it is time to fight Tavakai in all of his different forms. It's a great fight, I think, yet again, with 3 different phases and many different abilities. Thematically it checks out. He is some sort of Jade warrior as well, and he gets more and more corrupted as the fight progresses. When refused by the ancestors he corrupts their totems, and in the last phase the totems cast different abilities as well. I think the proximity to those totems determines which one activates. Half of this I only realized when watching back the footage, by the way, but it makes these fights only more impressive. Overall, Act 4 is absolutely awesome. The story, the world, the art style and locations and all these different bosses. It's crazy how much content is there. And it's not even over because there are interludes as well. These interludes were meant as basically a few zones to bridge the gap from Act 4 to the endgame, so that you don't have to rerun parts of the campaign again. This may lead you to think not that much effort was put into them perhaps, but that couldn't be further from the truth. If the devs would have said this was Act 5, it would have been completely fine. Sure, story-wise it makes no sense, but in terms of skill, design, and again the number of bosses, it's so good. I think I prefer this over Act 2, for example, or Act 3, come to think of it. During all of this, I will just show some gameplay, some bosses primarily, and I think they're very well designed. They're familiar in some cases, of course, but that makes sense, right? Reusing some assets. I don't mind that at all. In two particular cases, I struggled quite a bit with these bosses, because, you know, I don't have all the damage to rush them down, so I actually have to do the mechanics. First, Osmadi, the Faradan Prince, that took I think about 10 attempts. I think it's a very fair fight, all things considered, and quite original. It's unlike something I've seen in the game at least. The second boss that gave me a really hard time was the last boss of the Interludes, Zolin and Zelina. This fight is effectively a DPS gear check, like Gruul used to be in World of Warcraft, and just like back in my World of Warcraft raiding glory days, I failed that DPS check miserably. Part of that is a bad support gem setup, which I realized after the fact. A part of that is that these guys keep healing each other. Part of that is that I am very ethical at this game with this build, and I think it is also just a hard fight. Ultimately, after making some configuration changes and trying to focus on Zolin alone, I do manage. It takes at least 10 tries, but then finally, in terms of bosses, the interludes are over. In terms of upgrades, in the Kari's Crossing I find the Molten One's gift. I'm pretty sure this was bugged before, you couldn't enter the cave, so check it out on your main characters if you haven't. I get the +5 attributes, I get the final spirit, I decide to take cast on elemental ailments as I am freezing all the time. I will talk about that setup soon. I get a +3 staff which I desecrate, and I roll cold damage, which is huge, and I put some mana regen runes in as well. When I get the maps, my character is still a bit of a mess. I have two main issues to solve outside of standard stuff like getting resistance capped and some effective hit pool things. The first is damage. The second is remnants for infusions. The damage on the one hand is mostly a matter of gear, gem levels, definitely looking at my gem setup, support gems, that sort of thing, because I'm using a bunch of bad support gems. Maybe optimizing the passive tree a bit, but it is not my main concern. I know that with time I will find better gems and gear, and after having tested most of the support gems during the campaign, I now have a decent idea of what works and why it works. This is not necessarily reflected yet in this footage, by the way. This footage is still me struggling a lot, and also this is a tier 1 map, so it's pretty bad. The second problem is the remnant generation, and after reading some of your comments, which were quite helpful, I decided to fully invest into remnants, which primarily means a big respec on the passive tree where I spec out of damage and take pretty much any node that says remnant or infusion. Okay, I do read them. I don't take literally any of those nodes, but I take a lot of them, right? The vast majority. Because I don't want to read in the comment section I didn't invest enough into the playstyle. I can always take out a few later, is my thought. I also respec my ascendancy, so I have a 50% chance to generate a second different remnant. And I rearrange my support gems to either generate more remnants, make certain skills not consume remnants by using inhibitor, make remnants stronger, or make them be picked up from further away, or all of the above. And this solves a lot of issues actually in terms of remnants. The final question is really what I want to trigger with my cast on ailment buff. Firestorm is very cool and it uses 3 different remnants to get infused 3 times by all of the elements, but the damage isn't amazing, at least not yet. The visuals, however, are. It's fun. Orb of Storms is an option, it also generates a remnant, which can in turn create another cold remnant, and that's the one I need. Here you see one of the first iterations of the new setup, and this definitely is an improvement. I generate a ton of remnants, so that issue is solved. I trigger the storm fairly frequently, which I think is cool. I still have a lot of buttons to press myself, I do hope to minimize that, but it is a decent first improvement. I drop a lucky perfect jeweler's orb, which I slot into Ice Nova as that is my main clear skill. I support it with astral projection, so it can be cast on my cursor instead of around my character. That's big quality of life actually. I also started using Flame Wall, adding flat damage and double infusions to the frost darts, as you can see here. Once it all aligns, it works well. I upgrade my gear using Abyss crafting and greater essences, which is just really good. I really love that crafting. This new crafting in SSF is some of the best in the business, to be honest. I do a few attempts to corrupt 5-link snap, and the first 4 attempts I fail, but a little later I succeed and I go for more remnant support. I drop a +4 staff, which I ended up crafting using essences and Abyss into a very decent item, I would say. And that's where I'm currently at. After several additional iterations and fine-tuning, the build works quite well. This is a tier 7 map. I will drop the path of building in the description, although it's still not completely updated. I still haven't done a third trial because I hate that shit with a passion, and you can see the build in action. The main clear is Ice Nova, which freezes a lot, and that also triggers the cast with ailments spells, which are Elemental Weakness and Frost Bomb, so those are automated. I have another Elemental Weakness that I can cast myself if need be, but it's usually not required. This takes care of enemy resistances, leaving me to cast Snap on frozen enemies to generate even more remnants, and then when I encounter a rare, I cast Flame Wall, which uses a lightning infusion to also deal lightning damage, and if I can get my Frost Darts, which is still on a 4-link, to travel through the Flame Wall, it picks up 2 additional elements. The chunks inherit all of that flat damage as well, and if everything lines up and the stars all align, which in my opinion is a little bit too hard to pull off consistently, then these rare enemies die very fast. Most of them, usually. All things considered, however, knowing where I came from and how bad this skill felt, it is a massive improvement. However, despite the build being somewhat functional, I am not in love with it in any way, in any regard, and I feel continuing this build for me simply isn't worth it. I am here to have fun, and I did have an okay time. I definitely learned a thing or two again, but I also feel this build just isn't really it. More gear will make me clear a bit faster, but it will not reduce how many buttons I still have to press to kill a monster, and that is ultimately my biggest gripe with it. The frozen enemies that shatter are great. I really enjoyed it actually. Figuring out a build and reading your input, that's fun, but I also feel this build isn't really going anywhere. In PoE Ninja, my character is actually in the top 5 of this skill. That's never a good sign. And the other builds aren't even using it as the main skill, but they are just only triggering this. That's definitely not the definitive answer to whether this can work or not, but it's definitely not a good sign either. So, you know, I am leaving it at this. I do hope you had an enjoyable time watching this video. You know, thanks for sticking around and making it to the end. I truly appreciate all of that. I'm gonna reroll again, something else. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can follow that journey as well. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.